A heavy wooden club shatters the golden visor of a royal helmet with a sickening crack. A raging mob of peasants, armed with nothing but what they grabbed from the fields, drags a screaming man from his warhorse. In a frenzy, they hack at his armor, emblazoned with the royal coat of arms, until the movement beneath the pile of metal finally stops. The blood-soaked helmet is lifted high amid the triumphant roar of the crowd. They are convinced they have just killed Charles I, the all-powerful king of Hungary. But just 50 meters away, face buried in cold mud, the Real King watches in horror as his double dies. He wears a simple soldier's tunic, his body racked with violent trembling. Deju, the loyal knight who donned the royal armor as bait, takes the final blow meant for his lord. This brutal execution became the climax of the Battle of Posada in 1330. But before we plunge into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of the past, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And please tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. It's astonishing to realize that we're exploring these ancient stories together, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity. Panic, that is the word that defined those 4 days in the mountains. To understand how a superpower collapsed into a terror-stricken mob, we must strip away the myths and look at the people holding the swords. Charles Robert of the House of Anjou did not ask for power. He took it. The early years of his reign were spent ruthlessly crushing Hungarian oligarchs who dared challenge him. He seized gold mines, centralized the currency, and by 1330 commanded the most terrifying heavy cavalry in Central Europe. His knights rode destriers, warhorses bred specifically for shock combat, and their plate and mail deflected arrows like rain off a roof. Charles looked at the map of Europe and saw a kingdom bending to his will. He believed in the absolute authority of his crown and considered himself chosen by heaven. Basarab I, founder of Wallachia, represented a very different kind of challenge. He did not meet steel with steel. He met it with silence and geography. While Charles built armies, Basarab built a trap. He unified local voivodeships not through grand parades, but through forced alliances against the Golden Horde. He knew his light infantry would never survive a direct clash on open ground, so he refused to give the enemy that chance. The conflict began with a demand. Charles declared Wallachia his vassal state, demanding taxes, submission, and border security on his terms. Basarab, a pragmatist, sent envoys. He offered gold to buy peace. He offered hostages. He tried to ransom his country's independence. Charles spat on the offer. To him, negotiations were weakness. Basarab was not a ruler. He was a shepherd playing dress-up. The king assembled an army of 30,000 men and marched the full weight of the Hungarian war machine toward the Carpathians, intending to burn the capital at Curtea de Argeș and install his own governor. Contemporary illustrated chronicles depict the march. Knights in perfect formation, banners held high, absolute confidence in their invincibility. They expected battle, a field where they could lower their lances and thunder across the land. But Basarab gave them scorched earth. As the Hungarians advanced deeper into Wallachia, they found only empty villages. Wells were poisoned or dry. Granaries stood bare. The enemy refused to show his face. Hunger struck the royal army before the first arrow flew. Horses weakened. Knights sweated inside their heavy armor, marching across brutal terrain in pursuit of a ghost. Charles realized his mistake too late. When supplies ran out and his army began to starve, he ordered a retreat toward Transylvania, seeking refuge in its garrisons. But the only route back led through a narrow mountain pass, a jagged scar where cliffs rose like walls on both sides. Basarab watched the withdrawal from the ridgelines. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He let the vanguard pass. He allowed the king to enter the funnel. When the bulk of the Hungarian force squeezed into the narrowest section, where riders could not turn and lances could not be lowered, Basarab gave the signal. The trap did not merely snap shut. It exploded. To understand the madness of what happened in that mountain pass, we must weigh the forces involved. This was not a clash of equals. It was a collision between an empire entering its golden age and a state that barely existed on parchment. Charles I of Hungary stands in this equation as a titan. History often calls him Charles Robert, a name carrying the prestige of the House of Anjou. By the 1320s, he ruled a European superpower. The gold mines of Kremnica and the silver mines of Banska Styavnica flowed directly into his treasury. Hungary supplied a massive share of Europe's gold, financing a renaissance of art, architecture, and above all, war. Charles could afford standing mercenary armies and heavily armored knights. If Charles was the hammer, Basarab was the anvil, silent, immovable, forged in shadow. Records about Basarab are sparse, but he emerges as a shrewd political survivor, trapped between the Golden Horde to the east and a ravenous Catholic Hungary to the north. The war began with a deceptive victory. When Hungarian forces reached the border in autumn 1330, they captured the fortress of Severin without resistance. Basarab surrendered it, confirming everything Charles believed. The Wallachian shepherd was retreating. Emboldened, Charles accepted a final embassy from Basarab. The terms were astonishing. Basarab offered to renounce all claims to Severin, pay all debts, send his son as a hostage, and deliver 7,000 marks of silver. In the 14th century, roughly 1.7 tons of silver, this could sustain an army for months. Basarab was willing to empty his treasury to spare his people invasion. Advisors begged Charles to accept. But Charles did not merely reject the offer. He mocked the man who made it. The Chronicle records his words with chilling precision. Basarab is the shepherd of my sheep, and I will pull him by the beard from his lair. That sentence, born of personal arrogance, signed the death warrant of thousands. Charles led his army into a green hell. Roads turned to mud tracks. Dense forest blocked the sun. But the true enemy was silence. Basarab stripped the land to the bone. Every village was a smoking ruin. Hunger reduced noble knights to root-digging scavengers. Soldiers looked at their priceless destriers and saw food. They slaughtered the very horses they depended on in battle. Dysentery cut down ranks faster than arrows. And throughout this slow collapse, the Wallachians remained unseen. As winter approached, Charles ordered retreat through the pass, believing danger had passed. He did not know Basarab had already chosen this route. The Wallachians did not withdraw. They ran ahead, climbing ridges, stockpiling stones. The exact location of Posada remains debated, but the geography is indisputable. Basarab chose a place where mountains functioned as a vice. The path was barely wide enough for a few riders abreast. Heavy cavalry on open ground is a tank. In a mountain pass, it's a traffic jam. The column stretched for miles, a vulnerable serpent of metal and flesh. When the vanguard rounded a bend, they met a solid barricade. The trap snapped shut. Retribution fell from the sky. Wallachians began not with war cries, but with gravity. Massive boulders were levered from the ridges, crashing into the packed column with the force of siege engines. Horses were crushed instantly. Armor that once made knights invincible became metal coffins, crumpling under granite. Panicked horses trampled their own riders. Then came the arrows. Wallachian archers, positioned high above the chaos, rained death into the pit. They did not need to aim. The Hungarians were packed so tightly that every arrow found flesh. The slaughter continued without pause. Night fell, but the killing did not stop. The Wallachians knew the terrain and harried the trapped army relentlessly. The Hungarians could not sleep, could not light fires. By the second day, the valley floor was paved with bodies. Noble blood meant nothing. A peasant with a stone was stronger than a duke with a sword. The King of Hungary, the most powerful man in Central Europe, sat amid the carnage watching his ambitions turn to shattered bones. By the third day, the concept of an army no longer existed. The pass had become a grave. In this moment of absolute terror, the king made a decision that forever stained his legacy. He summoned one of his most loyal commanders, Desiderius Hetervary, known as Deju. Charles removed his royal surcoat bearing the Angevin arms and his golden helmet, and ordered Deju to wear them. The logic was cold. Charles knew the Wallachians hunted the crown. Deju accepted the suicidal mission. He rode into the kill zone, shouting orders, drawing every eye and every arrow. The ruse worked devastatingly well. Seeing the golden figure, Wallachian peasants surged down like a flood. This was not a duel, it was a mob execution. They dragged Deju from his horse and hacked him apart, believing they were killing the tyrant. While his friend died, Charles, clad in filthy leather, blended among squires, fled toward the exit of the pass. The hammer of peace fled like a thief in the night. Behind him, the slaughter reached its peak. The dead read like a census of Hungarian nobility, chancellors, voivodes of Transylvania, bishops. By the fourth day, silence returned, broken only by the river, blackened with blood. Basarab did not merely defeat an army. He erased it. Charles saved his life, but left his honor and the myth of his invincibility to rot in the mud of Posada. Of 30,000 men, only a pitiful remnant returned home. For Basarab, this victory marked the birth of a nation. He secured de facto independence, and his dynasty would rule Wallachia for centuries, producing descendants who continued the tradition of resistance, including Vlad the Impaler. Why did Posada happen? It is a lesson in asymmetric warfare. Charles violated the first rule: know the terrain. He relied on shock cavalry that required space. Basarab removed their engine. A stationary knight is just a turtle on its back. But the true architect of defeat was psychology, arrogance. Charles was so obsessed with being king and seeing Basarab as a rebel that he forgot he was leading a living organism that needed food and water. He fell victim to the sunk cost fallacy, pressing forward when he should have turned back. Posada proves that overwhelming firepower is meaningless if you cannot apply it. In the game of rock, paper, scissors, a rock dropped from a high enough cliff will always beat the sharpest scissors. Today, if you travel through the southern Carpathians, the exact site of the massacre lies hidden beneath forest. Nature reclaimed the bones and silver. But the legacy of those 4 days in 1330 is etched into Europe's map. Basarab did not merely win a battle, he bought time and a future for his people. This is the story of desperate men armed with stones and fury who stood against the crushing weight of empire and said, "No further." If you survived this journey through the mountain pass with me, thank you for watching. And here's a question for you. Was Charles' mistake simply arrogance, or was he a victim of an inevitable shift from feudal warfare towards something more modern? Share your thoughts in the comments. And watch the next video on screen to learn about another moment when an underdog changed the course of history. See you there.